the next few months, this program will look at 5 different BC communities and the issues related to our energy future. Hi, I'm Fanny Kiefer. We'll seek local input, talk to industry and to environmentalists. As you know, in a resource-based province like BC, there is a wide diversity of strong opinion. We had a healthy debate when we built the first railway, the Trans-Canada Highway, and the first Trans-Canada Pipeline. How to expand BC's energy sector is our modern-day challenge. It's a challenge that calls for informed opinion to get to the right solutions. As we strive to find a balance, we will hear from a variety of British Columbians who have a personal stake in our energy future. Halfway up the east coast of Vancouver Island lies the Comox Valley, which includes the communities of Courtenay and Comox. Comox, Indigenous for land of plenty. The first inhabitants were First Nations people. They came here thousands of years ago to create and build a rich cultural heritage that lives on today. European settlers arrived in the mid-1800s when the early economy depended on logging, farming, and mining. During World War II, RAF Station Comox was created to patrol the Pacific. Today, it's known as 19 Wing CFB Comox. It is the area's top employer. Today we're going to talk to a group of people who have varied opinions on energy. We'll chat about everything from how resources are extracted, moved, and used, to why the energy topic stirs up lively debate among friends and neighbors. When you live on an island, the safe movement of fossil fuels is a concern. Let's find out what people are saying. Rocky Mountain Cafe is located in the heart of town. It's the perfect place to find out how locals really feel about energy and finding a balance. As BC expands its energy sector, what concerns you about more tankers along the coast, another pipeline to the island?
I would rather see pipeline than tankers. I met somebody a while back who was telling me how much the pipelines have improved and all the technology that wasn't there when the old pipes were put in. And I think from what I hear, it's a lot safer to send things by pipeline, but then they get to the coast and they have to go somewhere.
Yeah, we need to keep people on the island working too, and that's a really tough part of that whole conversation is actually where the fine line draws between people keeping working and supplying fuel.
What concerns you?
I think the worst thing, of course, is earthquake. Accountability from the big firms, big corporations that go ahead and put these things in place. We already know that they're not infallible. Things happen. And I don't think it's the way of the future. I think we need to be looking at other resources.
I know the problem. The problem is we all use energy. You know, we've made our small moves to conservation. We've all bought the little light bulbs that use less electricity, and we try to drive slower, you know, not wasting fuel. And so how do we find the balance between our need for energy and preserving the beauty of the coast that we have?
So here we are at fabulous Philburg Park with an illustrious panel of 5. With me is Jim DeHart. He's a master river guide and president of the BC Wilderness Tourism Association. Also here is Brenda Kenny. She's president and CEO of CEPA, which stands for Canadian Energy Pipeline Association. And to my left, the second-term mayor of Comox, Mayor Paul Ives. He's a lawyer and a politician. Natalie Robinson is here. She is the mother of 2 young children. She works at a financial institution in the Comox Valley. And finally, Captain Stephen Brown. He spent 21 years at sea. He's president of the Chamber of Shipping of British Columbia. And last but not least, it's my pleasure to welcome Lisa Edwards, who is a graphic recorder from Victoria. She will be mapping our discussion. Lisa's here because of our partnership with the University of Victoria. They have a program which looks at how groups on opposing sides of an issue can find common ground through a picture. We'll reveal her drawing a little later in the program. Now, let's get started. You know, when you extract, move, use oil, gas, or energy, we have to do it right and responsibly. So what is doing it right to you, Captain Brown?
Leaving no stone unturned, I would summarize that as. From a safety perspective, no matter what sort of shipping we're talking of, the important thing is that we do everything not just by the book, but we also use a large degree of common sense in terms of what we're doing. And I think it was very well summarized when I was in Norway in June, just a few weeks ago. And as one person said to me, we know that there are some risks involved, but we trust you to do it properly.
And you're talking risks in the shipping sector, in the sea. How far out from a place like Comox would a big ship go?
Potentially just off the coast here, it could be 3 to 5 miles, depending on what type of ship it is, whether it's a cruise ship, whether it's a general cargo ship transiting the coast. But the important thing is that it's done safely.
Okay, and to do that, captain on board, obviously. Do you have a BC Coastal pilot on board as well?
You sure do. Here in British Columbia, we actually have the largest single pilotage area in the world. And in many cases, depending on the length of the transit, the type of ship involved, there's not just one, but actually 2 BC Coastal pilots on board.
Okay.
And often they're very senior pilots with a minimum of 6 years experience.
And as mayor of this town, what concerns you about tankers going up and down the coast of British Columbia?
Well, we see the cruise ships go up and down, and we just trust the fact that they're going to do that without incident. That being said, it wasn't that many years ago when we had the ferry go down off of the North Passage. And so, you know, there's always a human factor, and I guess that's what we're concerned about, and nobody wants to see the Exxon Valdez on their doorstep. And certainly that's the concern that most residents would have, is we understand it has to travel by sea as the most safe method, but if something does happen, how is it going to be addressed? How is it going to be cleaned up? And hopefully we can get some answers to those questions.
Sure. And how good are we at emergency response? And perhaps that's over to you, Jim.
Well, I think one of the things we have to consider is that the response needs to be within the technology that we've got. And some of the product being suggested for shipping, the bitumen sinks, and most of the technology is about cleaning up surface. So, you know, we got to look at if it's going to go ahead, it should be something we can actually address, not something we're not quite sure how to address at this point.
And do you think that's in place now?
Not from the information that I've seen. The problem with the bitumen or the diluted bitumen is that it doesn't float long enough to clean it up. So that's an issue both in rivers and in the ocean. So whether there's a pipeline rupture or an issue with shipping, the cleanup is an issue because it's a type of product that we don't have the technology right now to clean up properly.
And Brenda, as a scientist?
Well, I'd agree with Jim that it's important to have the right science and the right techniques. I think that this is a really good example of where there's a need to make sure we do have the facts at hand, because I probably have been looking at different studies than Jim has. And I can tell you that from a pipelining point of view, we've been carrying these products for several decades, and there's absolutely no evidence that there's anything injurious about them. But of course, your emergency response has to understand what is the product and what are the techniques, and to Jim's point, you know, how long will it stay on the surface in which you're deploying those techniques, whether it's days, weeks, or longer. That's critically important.
And how does natural gas get to the island? How does oil get to the island?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you should say, Fanny, because for pipelining, you know, that's really the primary way any oil and natural gas moves around the province today. Certainly natural gas on the island has been coming here since the early 90s by pipeline. Much of the liquid fuel is moved by barge, although it gets to the coastal area by pipeline. And in British Columbia today, almost 3/4 of all the energy used is either oil or natural gas across the whole province. So there's a whole lot of energy moving around that most folks just don't really think about.
And I'm assuming pipelines under the sea.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Where you're crossing large channels, and that's a very common practice, and without incident.
How old are they?
Well, it can depend. There are many systems in British Columbia today. You've got over, I think it's 8,500 kilometers of pipeline today, and much of that can be as old as 5 decades or as young as a couple of years.
Okay, Natalie, as a mom of 2 children and somebody who hangs out in the coffee shop and talks about things like this, what are your concerns about energy, energy expansion, liquefied natural gas?
Well, the smaller details are something I don't generally want to know too much about. I don't want to get wrapped up in all the details, but I know it's coming. I know it's a topic, and there's good points to each side. Like environmentally, I'm concerned that there is potential for a spill, and this place is beautiful. It's a little piece of heaven, and I have 2 young kids, and I want it to be here forever for them. And on the other side, industry is really important for our economy. So I'm a bit on the fence about it, and usually I have an opinion about everything.
Well, this is good. And feel free to jump in. Jobs in this town important to the mayor.
Well, I think there's a disconnect that people have between natural resource development and the jobs that are generated out of that activity. In this community, we're largely a bedroom community of about 13,500. And there's quite a few, especially of the young people that are working elsewhere up in the oil patch or other parts of the province that are making their high-paying wages in those places and thankfully bringing them back home here to their families. But it does create a bit of a strained family life at times. And, for somebody who's got 3 sons who are in their 20s, to see the opportunities they might have to work within the province, I think is something to consider. And we always talk about training for skills, whether it's welders or pipe fitters and the like, and we can do all that training, but are we just going to be exporting those jobs as well?
And I'm certain, and if you talk to the Premier, she'll agree, we need more skilled workers in the province. And are they being trained? Question one. And how do you liquefy natural gas, which would take us all day to explain, but somebody has to know how to do that and to export it safely, and if indeed we're going to go to Asia.
It is very specialized, and I think one of the things to keep in mind with any sort of industrial development on a regional level is sometimes you will see people trained in one location, and perhaps for a short time they're working in the industry that's pulling them in, but we've seen a lot of apprenticeships develop through working, say, in the oil sands or on pipelines, and then they'll go back to their home province and be able to develop a welding shop or company that they wouldn't have otherwise had the skills to do. So it's bettering the overall workforce by making sure that we're well equipped, and the capacity for that training is something we really need to work on together.
Okay, and as we look at exporting energy to Asia, Korea, Japan, India, China, what are your concerns, Captain?
I have no major concerns that we can do that safely. The practice of moving oil off the coast of British Columbia has been going on for a number of years. The Trans Mountain Pipeline has been in operation, as you know, for 60 years now. And I think it's very important that people don't lose sight of the fact that currently, because we're selling oil at that large discounted price, we're losing anything from $30 to $50 million a day on the sale of our oil into the United States. And when a small town mayor is faced with the sort of financial pressures that you are, I think those things can't go unnoticed. And so it's a question of reaping the benefits of our natural resources and keeping that money in Canada, putting it to good use in Canada. There is so much that needs to be done with ensuring that we do everything that we need to do to ensure integrity of our environment. And I couldn't agree more. We all live here and we all want it to continue forever. We don't want it to be compromised.
We want to be able to trust the government and look at government regulations and say those are the right regulations. And certainly, Jim, you know that, being a river guide, an outfitter, you worked for the national or the provincial parks.
Yeah, well, I mean, setting the foundation so that's the right way to approach it is the key part, because we all know that there's a lot of stresses on budgets as far as having eyes on the ground. So set it up right from the start. Some of the things that we've been looking at is, do we really need every company to run their own pipeline? Should we look at corridors? I mean, right now you don't run telephone through your backyard and cable house to house and hydro out front. If we're going to have the risk associated with moving it, put it all into one corridor where it can be managed more effectively. Look at moving product that makes the most sense, and some of the risks associated. We're concerned that as far as moving it out of Kitimat, for example, as opposed to Vancouver, which has more services available to deal with an issue. It's like navigating a semi-trailer through these trees and then across the field. The risk is all through the trees on the coast, not across the field to Asia or wherever else it's going.
Right.
So we're taking that risk. We're going to make sure it's managed properly.
So the location out of Kitimat, out of Rupert, where?
I understand those concerns. I think there's also an overarching concern about, are we just exporting product without adding any value to it? And you know, the proposal by David Black and the refinery, I think intrigued a lot of people, and we know that a refinery hasn't been built in Canada for decades, but if something like that could happen, or take LNG as another example, at least we're getting some value added within the province, and maybe that makes the shipping issue a little less complicated, because then you're not shipping the bitumen off the coast. It's coming into the pipeline, being refined, and then the product is being exported the same way they would do LNG. So that could be a game changer, perhaps, if there's some merit to it.
Well, you know, those of us who aren't in this business, the energy business, like Natalie, and they say we're going to liquefy natural gas and send it away, and always my first question is, well, how safe is that? And is that safer than shipping oil? And are the pipelines full? And would I rather have it under the sea or on top of the land?
It's tricky because anytime you think of oil and water together, they don't mix, so you don't want them together, right? But it's important. It's how the country runs, and we have this natural resource, and at least we'll be getting some profit from it, which we'll benefit from.
And I think more than that, it's a question of how the world actually runs as a trading bloc, so to speak. And natural resources will run from the country that holds those natural resources to the countries that need those natural resources, and in return we'll get those consumer goods. The challenge has always been to ensure that you have the best protection of the environment in place at any point in time. And quite frankly, for the marine industry, 1989 and the Exxon Valdez was an important turning point when we recognized that what we thought was good could be improved enormously. And so the changes that have been effected since 1989, beginning with the Oil Pollution Act in 1990, initiated by the United States and now worldwide, whereby the construction of vessels, the double hulls, and other safe working practices have been adopted universally, has led everybody to understand that we've come an awful long way. And I can sit here and talk about it, but I think the proof is always going to be in the pudding. And when you look at the dramatic decline in oil spills worldwide since the days of Exxon Valdez, and in 2012, in fact, there were no major oil spills anywhere in the world from a tanker worldwide. I think we should be measured by the progress that we've been made, but we should not be complacent. We should build on what's already been achieved.
Yes, I would say the same thing on the on-land portion as well. There have been some incredible advancements, and that's not enough. We'll keep going, but there's a great opportunity to understand that if you're going to have a large infrastructure on the coast, such as an LNG export point or the terminus for a liquid pipeline, it can create an anchor for so many other things, like improved navigation or improved emergency response for any number of other hazardous materials in the area. And on the liquids and the issue of whether or not there's a refinery, I think that's a great question. But I would also kind of look back at the history of pipelining, where they've tended to start with that tube of steel being used for one thing, and over time it can be used for a different kind of refined product. So there's nothing that stops us from evolving as the markets change around the world, but you need to start with the anchor that's actually going to be
right. And Jim, as an everyday Canadian, well, not that you're an everyday guy, but you know what I mean, somebody who makes your living in tourism and all of that, what really concerns you? The trust factor, as you know, energy is polarizing, the energy topic, and expanding energy, polarizing.
Yeah, I guess we want to see the evidence. We want to see that it's not going to create an issue. If we want to take the proposed Enbridge Northern Gateway pipeline, crosses 1,500 watercourses. Half of those are salmonberry, and includes the Fraser and the Skeena, two of our biggest watersheds. If there was a spill on any kind of magnitude, that would have a huge impact on, potentially a large section of the Fraser or the Skeena watersheds and all the associated wildlife and downstream issues associated with that. So, anything that's going to be done needs to be done right. We haven't seen a lot of examples of the precautionary principle in BC. We've done lots of let's try it and see how it works and then try and fix it after. We need to be more cognizant of the ability of saying, look, until we know for sure, this is the way we're going to do it, and we may ease back later, but we need to make sure that the existing resources we have are protected we don't want to drop what we already have to pick up the latest shiny object, just to destroy what we've already got.
I think erring on the side of caution is always good. Natalie, agree?
Yeah, and it does concern me with the environment. Like, accidents happen. They happen all the time. You know, before there were car seats, a lot more kids got hurt, but accidents still happen. And I'd want to be reassured.
But I think that's a very good point. And the marine industry, the aviation industry, the rail industry, which has recently been in the headlines, unfortunately for the wrong reasons, or even road accidents or bicycle accidents. I think we have to acknowledge that those things happen, but I think we also have to ensure that the lessons learned are applied to ensure that there's not a repetition of those. And I think the recent rail accident will be a very good example of that. And I think the 1989 incident in terms of Exxon Valdez, as I said, was a turning point. And we've never looked back from that, because we really did learn a lot of new things, and we've applied a lot of new lessons and regulations.
Sure, but as we all know, rules can be in place and not followed.
But I think, in fairness, that there is so much auditing of ship traffic today. Transport Canada inspects physically 20% of all the ships that come onto the coast of British
Okay, and that's
Columbia.
gas, oil, coal, all ships?
Doesn't matter. Every
Same
tanker
thing on
gets
pipelines,
inspected.
too. The amount of auditing and inspection is.
Yeah,
And
every
high
tanker.
technology good?
Every tanker gets inspected, and 20% of all other ships. It's a very targeted exercise, because if a ship has a record of failure of inspection, then that ship will be targeted very heavily by Transport Canada. The classification societies do their thing. It is a highly, highly regulated industry today, and really there's no room for anybody to get away with anything.
I guess one of my concerns on that, though, I mean, there was a recent story in the last few months on the pipelines where it was found through an audit that, I don't remember the particular company, but they were going to need 5 years to come up to the existing standard, because a number of their pump stations were not in compliance. So, you know, when those kind of things hit the headlines, all it does is put up red flags for people who aren't in the industry.
And we have to search for truth and do due diligence and try and find the truth. And we have to trust, as you know, trust industry, trust government, trust each other, and go to our hearts.
Hold industry to account.
Absolutely, and trust in our hearts and souls that this is what we want. And if we don't want something, well, we make a lot of noise.
Yeah, and I think coming back to the earlier point on spill response, the primary motivation for us to go to Norway in June was to look at their spill response regime, because we hear a lot about how world leading it is. And so we really wanted to make that comparison, and even if there was a 1% improvement that we could effect in our regime by learning learning from what has been done in Norway,
unfortunately,
we wanted to do that.
We've run out of time. I thank all of you. We're coming back with our artist, and it's very interesting, this mapping thing. When you look at this visual, this drawing, what comes to mind?
Well, I think for me, it's obviously a balancing act. If you apply that precautionary principle we talked about, for many people, nothing would ever get done. But for the province and for people living here in this town, I think if we can find that right balance between social development, economic improvements and growth from that, all without sacrificing the environment, then that's going to be the challenge going forward. And I think people have a very high regard for the environment here. We're sitting in a place where that is foremost in mind. So where can we go with that, and how can the industry bring that forward as a top of mind issue?
Absolutely. We thought we'd all move here, and maybe that would be a nice thing to do. What comes to mind for you?
I think it's a really interesting depiction of the conversation. And one thing that keys in for me is the statement, safety is important and so is economic benefit. I like the word "and" in there, because they really go hand in glove. It's not a trade-off, and that economic benefit can lead to a lot of safety measures being implemented for sure. That's important.
Okay. Jim?
Yeah, again, back to the mayor's comments, I mean, it is a balance, and I think we want to be careful that we don't throw away what we already have. You know, it's a key thing that, you know, we've made some of those mistakes in the past to make sure that we don't do it again, and protect what we've got, and look at the right way to move forward.
And move forward with community in mind and community perspectives in mind.
Start, you know, looking generations ahead, not just the next political cycle.
Right, good stewardship, obviously, and that's important to you, Natalie.
Certainly. I really like the drawing of trust as a foundation, because we have to trust the experts. They do know what they're doing. There's a history. There's industry all over the world that's doing this. But is our technology ready for this little place? Is something I'm concerned about. So I try and have trust for all the experts involved, but.
And information. And Steve, you have lots of information because you've been at sea.
Well, I think what we're capturing here is the very essence of sustainable resource development, and I think the elements of that are being totally captured. There are many elements, and it's also, as it's being captured here, important that everybody is provided with the facts. So, by definition, sustainable resource development is the balance that we have to find with the environment.
Okay.
And I think that's what we're accurately capturing.
And by definition, a sustainable fossil fuel.
Well, and the appropriate information about all of that. There needs to be a transition to other kinds of energy, but in the meantime, there's a huge amount of energy used around the world and in British Columbia. So if there are questions, like questions about bitumen on water, for example, we need to make sure that the science is very transparent, and if there are any remaining concerns, that they're fully addressed.
And if you're not in the field, it's difficult.
It is very, yeah.
It's difficult to filter all the information because there's a lot of it.
One thing we didn't talk about, but I think is very important, is First Nations and how they look at economic development. They have 200-year planning, 300-year planning horizons. And in our relations as a local government with our local First Nation, that's always come forward as a long-term view. And I think, as Jim said, we do have to take a long-term view. We know what's possible now and what could happen in the next 5 years, but what could happen in 10, 20, 30 and onwards. So that is the essence of sustainable development, and I think First Nations have articulated that.
Well, in bringing people together on a hot potato topic, and indeed today it is one of the hot potato topics.
Indeed, and I think the recognition that we're capturing also that accidents may happen, but the importance of preparedness for any incidents should they occur, I'm very happy that we're capturing that.
And there are places nobody wants an accident to happen. You know, they say, well, if it happens over here, it's not as important. But if it happens in a pristine wilderness, that means more to me.
Yeah, and that's where your standards and redoubling efforts and understanding a good open conversation about the technology and the risks. And we know that there are many industries that are near zero risk, and Stephen was talking about that with regard to shipping. Pipelines on an overall basis are very safe, but we are driving towards zero incidents, and where there are environmental concerns in sensitive areas, we're close to that, and our commitment is absolutely to work with British Columbians and get there.
Yeah, and a balance between environment and economy.
And accountability.
Yes, accountability.
That's a good word to close on. Accountability. As we close our first Find a Balance, we've learned a lot about how locals feel about energy expansion in this neck of the woods. Now it's your turn to join us. Online you'll find segments of this and other shows along with a posted version of our graphic recording. Thanks for watching.